Prince Harry has told London's High Court that coverage by the Daily Mail made his wife, Meghan's life, an absolute misery.
The courtroom fell silent. Not the ordinary quiet of a legal proceeding, but the suffocating stillness that comes when truth collides with belief. 11 words. That's all it took. 11 carefully chosen words to detonate a marriage, shatter a public image, and expose a reality so disturbing that even hardened journalists stopped taking notes. Make him tear up when discussing Diana. Those words weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic. Judge Margaret Thornberry simply read them aloud from a private message, her voice clinical and detached. But in that sterile courtroom, surrounded by mahogany panels and the weight of British law, those 11 words became a weapon that cut through years of carefully constructed narrative like a scalpel through silk. And Prince Harry, he didn't just react, he shattered. The moment everything changed. Have you ever watched someone's world collapse in real time? Not on screen, not in fiction, but right there in front of you, completely raw and unfiltered. That's what happened on that February morning in London's High Court. The trial had been predictable until that moment. Lawyers shuffled papers. The judge spoke in measured tones. Reporters scribbled notes. Standard procedure for a privacy lawsuit that had dragged on for months. But when Judge Thornberry reached that particular line in the evidence, something shifted. You could feel the oxygen being sucked from the room. Every eye turned toward the witness box where Prince Harry sat, shoulders locked in military posture, jaw set with determination. Then came the crack. His jaw twitched first, subtle, almost imperceptible. But then his hands resting on his knees, curled into fists so tight his knuckles turned bone white. His face, that famous face that had smiled from magazine covers and waved from palace balconies, twisted with something far more primal than embarrassment or anger. Pain, raw, visceral, devastating pain. What happened next will be replayed in documentaries for decades. Harry lowered his head slowly like a man trying to make himself smaller, trying to disappear. He covered his face with both hands, and then in the awful silence came a sound that made even the sketch artist's pencil stop moving. A sob, guttural, broken, real. Not the polished emotion of a public figure, not the managed vulnerability of a carefully planned interview. This was the sound of a man discovering that the worst lie he'd feared was actually worse than he'd imagined. The betrayal within the betrayal. Here's what makes this story so devastating. Those messages were never supposed to see daylight. They were private conversations between Meghan and a trusted friend from her California days. Someone she'd known since her acting career. Someone she confided in about everything. Or so she thought. That friend had quietly cooperated with the defense. The betrayal within the betrayal. But what she'd handed over wasn't just gossip or venting. It was something far more calculated, far more chilling. Judge Thornberry had warned the gallery earlier that morning. The messages contained graphic implications, not sexual content, but something potentially more damaging, evidence of systematic manipulation. That their pattern of destroying evidence and concealing their unlawful behavior continued into the litigation itself. What the courtroom was about to hear would paint not the vulnerable Duchess driven out by hostile press and cold institutions, but a strategist, a tactician, a brand manager orchestrating the most high-stakes personal rebrand of the decade. And at the center of it all, Harry's most sacred grief, his mother, Diana. The messages that changed everything. Make him tear up when discussing Diana. Let that sink in for a moment. The implication wasn't subtle. It suggested that Harry's grief, the trauma that had defined him since he was 12 years old, the wound that had shaped his entire life, had been prepped, scripted, staged not for healing, for headlines. Can you imagine discovering that your most intimate pain, the kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m. in cold sweats, the kind that makes you flinch at camera flashes because they remind you of the night your mother died? You know, you're 12 years old. Sort of. I just refused to accept that she was gone. Had been reduced to a media beat, a tactic in someone else's playbook. The judge continued reading, but nobody was really listening anymore. All eyes remained fixed on Harry. His shoulders rose and fell like waves crashing against rocks. Every sniffle echoed through the courtroom. Every tremble spoke volumes. His attorney stood, voice urgent. Your Honor, I request a recess. My client is experiencing severe emotional distress. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, couldn't be present today. However, his prepared statement following mirrors. Judge Thornberry, maintaining courtroom procedure, denied it. The presentation must continue uninterrupted. But even her voice had changed, thinner, shakier. Even she seemed shaken by what was unfolding. Outside the courthouse, phones buzzed, protocol forgotten, reporters broke the rules, fingers flying across screens. Prince Harry collapses in court. The message that changed everything. Text shatters Sussex defense. Some breaking news to bring you now from the High Court. The Duke of Sussex has settled. What had begun as a slow-moving legal case about privacy had just exploded into something completely uncontainable. 4 hours of devastating silence. For the next 4 hours, Prince Harry didn't speak a single word. He sat in that witness box, face flushed, eyes swollen, hands trembling, while message after message was read aloud. Each one landing like a physical blow. Some messages were subtle, others were surgical, but together they painted a portrait too complex and too cruel to deny. One text from Meghan referred to a private family dinner as a gold mine of reactive content. Another described her plans to bake empathy into Harry's next public appearance. Then came this one. He wears grief like silk. We just need the right lighting. Grief like silk. Think about that phrase. Think about what it reduces a person's deepest trauma to. Fabric, texture, something to be displayed under the right conditions for maximum effect. The courtroom was frozen. Even veteran reporters who had covered wars and corruption scandals sat slack-jawed. This wasn't just reputation being dismantled. This was a worldview being destroyed in real time. The therapy sessions were rehearsed. The court entered what the defense called narrative construction and manipulation phase. It began with messages relating to Harry's therapy disclosures during the Oprah interview. You remember that interview, right? The one where Harry opened up about feeling trapped, about his struggles, about the system that had suffocated him. Meghan's private texts dissected his language like a director reviewing an actor's performance. Good. That line about trapped in the system landed well. But next time, pause longer before I couldn't even call my grandmother. It needs space to breathe. There were rehearsals. You know, my grandmother has been amazing throughout after my grandmother had said, the moment you land. Whole paragraphs that appeared nearly verbatim in their interviews, now traced back to Meghan's drafts with annotations. Insert breath here for a motion catch. Glance down and rub fingers when saying, my brother stopped taking my calls. Each revelation chipped away at something once believed sacred. Harry shifted in his seat. His back stiffened, then slouched, then sagged entirely. At one point, he rubbed his face so hard it left red streaks across his cheeks. His lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently. Harry didn't respond. He looked like a man trying to physically retreat from his own skin. The message that broke him. 2 hours into the presentation, the courtroom air had become unbearably heavy. That's when Judge Thornberry read the message that silenced even the legal teams. He still wants their approval. It's pathetic, but I can use it. The guilt over his mother makes him easy to redirect. That's the engine. Someone in the back row whispered, Jesus Christ, before catching themselves. Harry flinched, but he didn't sob this time. He just closed his eyes, then opened them again, slower, more hollow, like something had shut off behind them, like a flame had been extinguished. His security detail exchanged glances. One officer took a subtle step forward. Another unhooked a water bottle from his belt. They didn't act, but they were ready. According to a Palisade present, Harry looked as if he had forgotten how to be in his own body. When the judge asked if he needed a recess, Harry didn't answer. He simply nodded. Not defiance, not defeat, just emptiness. The nod of a man whose decisions had all been taken from him by timing, by evidence, by someone he trusted more than life itself. After a 30-minute break, Harry returned physically present, but emotionally absent. His gait had slowed. His eyes were rimmed with red. His suit jacket hung off him like borrowed fabric. There were visible tissue marks on his sleeve. One of his lawyers tried to hand him a notepad. He didn't take it. And then the presentation continued. The court entered Phase 3, the monetization of royal pain. Messages discussed which childhood memories still had shelf life. Meghan had written to her friend about whether to include certain traumas in her podcast or save them for her book. Don't waste it all on the first product. Harry's got layers. The abandonment arc still hasn't been fully tapped. Abandonment arc. Like his childhood trauma was a television series with multiple seasons to exploit. Another message read, We need to get a clip of him saying something about the Queen's corgis. Nostalgia is pure engagement. By this point, Harry was no longer reacting to individual messages. His hands were limp, his eyes fixed on the edge of the witness box, his breathing shallow. The only signs of consciousness were the slight twitches of his jaw and the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. The judge noticed. She paused again, looked toward the bench. Does the witness need another break? This time, his lawyer answered for him. Yes, Your Honor. He needs a moment. He is not well. Harry didn't move. He just stared ahead as if the act of standing would tear him open. When court recessed, he didn't walk out on his own. Security flanked him on either side, guiding him like paramedics leading a concussion victim down a hallway. When court resumed the next morning, the world held its breath. What came next was methodically, devastatingly organized into 3 distinct categories, each labeled clearly on evidentiary folders, visible to cameras and journalists. Category 1, monetization. Category 2, family manipulation. Category 3, emotional exploitation. The first category revealed exchanges spanning late 2022 to summer 2024. These weren't scandalous in tone, but strategic in structure, like reading a branding memo dressed up as personal correspondence. One message broke down revenue streams tied to specific emotional narratives. Diana legacy equals halo. William equals unresolved tension. Catherine equals comparison vector. Charles equals redemption thread if ever needed. Us equals survivors reclaiming identity. Their Netflix contract was described as our pension vehicle. Meghan wrote they needed to stretch the royal trauma arc across at least 3 projects to ensure long-term cash flow. She used the phrase trauma fatigue pacing to describe how to time disclosures. Then came merchandising strategies. A children's brand featuring royal resilience themes, a plush toy line called Archie Bears, a motivational picture book tied to their daughter's name. Most shocking, a note labeled Crisis Capital that detailed how to pivot negative press into higher engagement by framing it as bullying or colonial backlash. One line highlighted in bold, "We don't run from scandals, we alchemize them." What had been presented publicly as organic and vulnerable now looked painfully transactional. If the first category undercut the Sussex brand, the second detonated its moral foundation. These messages revealed how Meghan viewed the royal family, not as relatives, but as players in a long-term negotiation. Prince William was the real threat due to his polished anger and institutional loyalty. Meghan noted he was less emotional than Harry, more dangerous because of it, disturbing to watch. Catherine was called the uncrackable mask. Meghan expressed frustration that no attempts to provoke a public reaction had succeeded. She speculated about Catherine's mental health, marriage, and parenting style using phrases so cruel that journalists struggled to quote them directly. If she cracks in public even once, it shifts the whole narrative. But she's colder than marble. More unsettling were messages about King Charles, described as sentimental and weak in the right light. Meghan suggested he could be used for public reconciliation if we ever need to soften the brand, adding that his guilt over Diana could be a lever if pulled properly. But perhaps most emotionally devastating were references to Archie and Lyot. We'll decide later how Windsor we want them to appear. Titles matter, but not as much as optics. Optics, the royal blood of her own children, weighed against headlines. The coldest messages of all. The final category was the deepest cut, not because it exposed cruelty, but because it revealed coldness. These messages were exclusively about Harry, his vulnerabilities, his traumas, his inner world, and how to shape them. Meghan recounted a therapy session Harry attended. He opened up about the tunnel dream again. Said he keeps seeing his mother's face before the crash. I told him to write it down. Could be powerful. Open to something bigger. Something bigger. Grief transformed into content. There were discussions cataloguing Harry's night terrors. His fear of helicopters, his guilt, his shame, all indexed like database entries. But one message silenced the entire courtroom. He said he misses his brother. I told him that's just memory, not reality. That nostalgia lies. Had to redirect fast. He was drifting. Redirect fast. He was drifting. This wasn't communication. It was control. Emotional re-steering. The careful trimming of human connection. Harry's face, as this was red, ashen, and motionless, spoke louder than any outrage could. He didn't protest. He didn't cry. He just stared. The final blow. Nothing compared to the final message read slowly and quietly by Judge Thornberry. Harry's love for them is a vulnerability. If we don't manage it, it will derail everything. Not his love for me, not our love for each other, his love for them, his family, his past, his identity. As the courtroom sat in stunned silence, it became devastatingly clear these messages hadn't just destroyed a narrative. They'd revealed a machine, a mechanism for controlling perception, emotions, and people, with Harry at the center. Not as a prince, not as a husband, but as a tool. The aftermath begins. The moment the courtroom adjourned, institutional silence began to crack. The palace's official response was characteristically restrained, but it came from Clarence House, from King Charles himself. This is a difficult time for all families. Some matters are best resolved privately and with compassion. Behind closed doors, sources describe the king as calm but drained. According to a senior courtier, his first words after reading the transcripts were, "This is not vengeance. This is gravity." He issued one quiet instruction. The household must remain disciplined. No gloating, no leaking, no vindictive statements. This is not a victory. It's a collapse. What hurt Charles most wasn't damage to the institution, but the portrayal of his son as a pawn, a project, a walking brand strategy with trauma as currency. Prince William burned in silence. Those close to him described him as furious, not at Meghan, but at Harry. He let her do this. He handed us over. When William read the message labeling Catherine the uncrackable mask, he went completely silent, then reportedly said she was trying to break her. The global reaction. Within 48 hours, the world had picked sides. But here's what made this different from previous royal controversies. Even Meghan's most ardent supporters found themselves speechless. In the United Kingdom, public opinion didn't just shift, it avalanched. Polls showed Harry's sympathy ratings dropped to the lowest level since his departure from royal life. Meghan's approval plunged even further, with some polls placing her favorability in the single digits. But the United States, where the couple had found refuge and support, told a more complex story. Morning shows that had once championed their courage now featured panels of psychologists analyzing manipulation tactics. Editorials in major newspapers spoke not just of betrayal of family but betrayal of trust with a public who had believed their narrative. Social media became a battleground. The hashtag #Harry deserves better trended alongside #Meghan exposed. TikTok exploded with therapists breaking down the messages, identifying patterns of gaslighting and emotional control. Instagram influencers who had posted supportive content began quietly deleting old posts. Corporate sponsors felt the heat immediately. A streaming platform executive was quoted anonymously. "We bought a memoir, not a manipulation manual." Several brands quietly distanced themselves from Sussex-related projects. Endorsement deals entered what one insider called indefinite review. The psychology behind the pain. Mental health professionals who analyzed the courtroom footage and message content identified something crucial. This wasn't just about public embarrassment. Harry was experiencing what therapists call reality dissolution. The moment when your entire understanding of your life story gets rewritten by someone else. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trauma specialist who spoke to multiple news outlets, explained, "When someone you love uses your deepest wounds as strategic tools, it doesn't just hurt your feelings. It fractures your sense of reality." Harry is discovering that moments he thought were genuine connection were actually performances he was directed to give. The messages about Diana were particularly devastating from a psychological perspective. Harry had spent decades processing his mother's death, seeking therapy, opening up publicly about his struggles. To discover that these sacred moments had been optimized for engagement was, according to experts, a form of psychological violence. "It's one thing to be betrayed," noted Dr. Mitchell. "It's another to discover you were never actually living your own life. You were starring in someone else's production." What the palace knew. Perhaps most disturbing were the quiet revelations about what palace insiders had suspected all along. Multiple sources speaking on condition of anonymity confirmed that senior royals had noticed troubling patterns years earlier. One former aide recalled a conversation with Prince William in early 2020. "He said something I'll never forget. He said, 'My brother speaks differently now. He uses words that don't sound like him. It's like someone's written a script and he's reading it back.'" Catherine had apparently noticed it, too. Friends described her frustration at watching Harry and Meghan's interviews, recognizing phrases and anecdotes that Harry had once told differently, now repackaged with new emotional emphasis and different conclusions. King Charles, ever the diplomat, had tried to bridge the gap, but according to insiders, even he had expressed concern to trusted advisors. "I don't recognize my son's voice anymore." The words are his, but the message feels manufactured. The tragedy, these sources noted, was that no one could say anything without sounding paranoid or controlling. How do you tell someone their wife is manipulating them without destroying any remaining relationship? How do you prove that authentic emotion is being weaponized? You don't. You wait. You hope they see it themselves, and you prepare for the moment when the truth inevitably surfaces. That moment came in a London courtroom with devastating precision. The children caught in the middle. Amid all the courtroom drama and global reaction, 2 young children became the story's most heartbreaking footnote. Archie and Lilet, referenced in their mother's messages as branding opportunities, now represented something far more complicated. Innocent casualties of adult warfare. Legal experts began speculating about custody implications. If Harry chose to leave, or if the marriage collapsed under the weight of these revelations, where would the children live? British law, American law, royal protocol, and international custody agreements would collide in unprecedented ways. Royal historians noted that never before had the custody of children with royal blood been determined in American courts. The complications were staggering. Dual citizenship, security protocols, titles, education, cultural identity. More painfully, sources close to Harry revealed his deepest fear, that his children were being raised in the same manufactured environment he just discovered he'd been living in. Were Archie's milestones being documented for authentic family memories or for content calendars? Were Libet's first words cherished moments or engagement opportunities? The messages had planted seeds of doubt about everything. And for a father trying to give his children the authentic childhood he never had, those doubts were torture. Can Harry come back? Public sentiment began shifting. Not away from Harry entirely, but towards something unexpected: pity. Millions watched the courtroom footage. Millions saw the shaking hands, the blotchy face, the silence of a man undone. Mental health experts weighed in, noting signs of gaslighting, codependency, trauma manipulation. Suddenly, a new narrative emerged. Not Harry the betrayer, but Harry the betrayed. King Charles has reportedly communicated through intermediaries that Harry would be welcomed back to the UK privately, quietly, without cameras, not as a working royal, but as a son in need. "The institution has rules," Charles allegedly said. "But a father has none. Even Catherine, hurt though she is, believes the children deserve connection to their roots." Only William remains silent. His wounds are different, sharper, deeper. The betrayal between brothers isn't constitutional. It's personal. 3 roads forward. Harry now faces 3 paths. Stay, rebuild, renegotiate, try to forgive the person who may have rewritten his life story. Leave, divorce, disengage, fight for custody and identity across the Atlantic. Return, come back to the UK, to a family still reeling, to a public still uncertain, to an institution that may offer comfort but never forgets. Each path carries a price, each demands sacrifice, but only one offers truth. And after everything, after the tears, the transcripts, the trauma, truth is what Harry may now crave most of all. Because in the end, no matter how far Prince travels, no matter how many crowns he walks away from, he is still a son. He is still a brother. And perhaps someday soon, he might be ready to come home. The question isn't whether the door is still open. The question is whether Harry has the strength to walk through it. What do you think? Can love survive when truth shatters everything you believed? Can Harry find his way back? Share your thoughts below.